The NICET test is a lot. And if I'm focused on just 10, that's something I can deal with. Easier than 150 questions.
Hello and welcome to the Temporal 3 podcast where we talk about fire alarm. I'd like to welcome my guest today, Mr. Charles Aulner. Welcome, Charles.
Hello, thanks, Bryan.
And Mr. Ed Heyden. Welcome, Ed.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So the first thing I'd like to talk about today is the power of 10 and the significance and importance of using the power of 10 in the NICET exam. Let me start with you, Charles. I know this is a passionate subject for you. How important is the power of 10 in the NICET exam?
Extremely. I'm a math guy, so the power of 10 resonates with me in the way that we talk about it. I have 5 and 10 fingers, so counting to 10 makes it easy. And when you're taking a NICET test in your own mind, looking at questions 10 at a time helps to keep you on track. Ed, have you had experience with that?
Absolutely. You know, for me, guys, it's a kind of a hard thing to do, but once you get into the groove of actually identifying what needs to be looked at and what needs to be really just put aside, guessed, and moved on, it really helps you out towards the end of the exam with time, especially.
Absolutely. Doing that grouping of 10, I always tell our students that, the questions in the exam are numbered. Whether it's 83 questions or 150 questions, doesn't matter. They are numbered, and utilize that numbering to be able to track those 10 and making sure that you're working 10 questions at a time. And then by applying that power of 10 and the 70% rule, saying, look, okay, I've got 10 questions here, 7 of them I need to make sure I know the answer to. Make sure I answer confidently, find it in the code if I need to. The other 3, I can afford to guess, and then repeat that pattern over and over and over again until you finish the exam.
Well,
If
another thing that it does is the NICET test is a lot. And if I'm focused on just 10, that's something I can deal with. Easier than 150 questions. I'm doing
Absolutely.
10 right now. I'm
Yep.
focusing on 10.
Yep.
Right, you're breaking it down actually into smaller bits. We used to use the analogy, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? And with that being said, by taking a look at the smaller picture and concentrating on that, the bigger picture becomes a lot clearer at the end.
For sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, taking that exam in smaller bites. I think you guys will agree. I know my NICET testing experience, which was way back in the 1990s in pencil and paper, but was extremely intimidating. And you look at that huge ream of paper, or what now the computer-based testing, where you're looking at that just huge list of questions, it becomes really, really intimidating. And you think, how am I going to get through this? But you're absolutely right. Break it down, smaller bites. Don't worry about the whole exam. Worry about 10 questions at a time.
And I think about that, how we try to bring forth that message in our classes, both our visual classes online and also our live classes. And you actually watch the students actually conform to that and then have an easier time finding information because it doesn't seem so overwhelming to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, next thing I'd like to talk about, guys, is an NFPA 70, one of our favorite codes. 76154A, the cable substitution table. This is one that we have a lot of lively discussion about in class. Charles, how do you feel about that cable substitution table?
Personally, I find that table shocking.
Shocking.
Back in the day when I was installing, this came down from experienced technicians that I learned from. Fire alarm cable has to be solid, has to be red, has to be 18 gauge as a minimum. And boy, this table contradicts all of that. Ed, what's your experience?
Oh, without a doubt, especially when the authority having jurisdiction asks where your red cable is, and when you use different color of that type of cable for different, let's say, pathways that you're running, it becomes a little bit difficult to explain that fire alarm cable necessarily does not have to be solid. It could be stranded, doesn't necessarily have to be red. It could be multiple of the colors. And there's more than just one gauge, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The one that gets me about this substitution table is the ability to substitute CM type cables for FPL type cables. And I always ask our students in the real world, have you ever been able to do that? If you have an application that requires FPLP, has your HJ ever let you use CMP? And the general resounding answer is not just no, but hell no. AHJ wouldn't accept that. And I said, well, what if it's in the code? And the AHJ still doesn't care. Is it
Well,
the authority of the AHJ to basically say, I don't care what the code says. Here's the way I want it done.
they will approve that installation. Will they not? If it's
Yep.
correct.
Yep.
So the experience that I've had, kind of going towards where you're going from there, Brian, is that I actually had a customer that decided they were going to read the code themselves, and they were going to have their guys wire the fire alarm system themselves, and they decided to use CM type cable, which could be Category 5 cable, Cat 5 cable. They wired the whole fire alarm system in Cat 5 cable.
Wow.
This to be known that when the authority having jurisdiction and myself came in to inspect the system, he took one look at it and said, I didn't approve this. Even though it's acceptable, I have to approve this. And he walked out, and consequently, they wound up contracting out another company to rerun wire that was acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction.
Wow.
Well, my experience, generally speaking, is if it's in the code and the AHJ is working with the fire alarm company and we show them what's in the code, generally they're receptive to that. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, but generally the AHJ wants to follow the code. Wouldn't you agree, Brian?
Generally, yes, but some AHJs, like Ed said, have their own personal preferences.
Well,
And
yeah, and there are exceptions always, right?
yeah.
There are.
Yep. But yeah, if you can show them in the code 9 times out of 10, unless you have an adversarial relationship, they are going to be at least willing to listen to what you have to say.
Very, very true. But they also have the ability to make a more stringent requirement of the code also. And with
Well,
that being said, they can go above and beyond what the code is actually saying, even though the cable is accepted in this particular area of the NEC. It may not have been accepted, first of all, in the plan's review, showing exactly what was the requirement in the riser system going up based upon that particular diagram. Now, of course, if the authority having jurisdiction, if I designed the fire alarm system using Category 5 cable, and there were a lot of other incidental things like voltage drop requirements, so on and so forth, the particular cable that I'm using, uh, the authority having jurisdiction would want me to prove this cable is actually going to work. And then whether he accepts it or not is going to be completely up to him.
So, guys, the other thing I'd like to talk about is the separation requirements for Class A circuits. This question came from a student recently about what are the separation requirements for Class A. Guys, what's been your experience with the separation?
well, I have only ever worked personally on Class B circuits, so I've never done a Class A system before myself. So my experience is strictly from what's in the code. Ed, how about you?
Yeah, I have. We tend to run a Class A circuit from normally the sprinklerizer. We'll run Class A from the water flow switch, and also from the tampers. And the reason why we do that is because as we know, Class A pathways, the intention is to survive a single open to keep the circuit running correctly, and they're not routed, of course, in the same conduit. They're routed in separate conduits by a separation. And now the code actually talks about that in NFPA 72 about the separation and the survivability rules based upon that. So, yeah, but very few and far between. But we have under requirements based upon specifications have run both A and Class B type circuits. Yes.
So, Charles, you mentioned the code, and the code is specific about this, about the separation for outgoing and return conductors, that it can't exceed 10 feet when you're going into a device or appliance or a control unit enclosure, and that single drops are permitted. And also, if you have small rooms under 1,000 feet,
Hmm.
that it's good to go. But there's something interesting that a lot of people don't notice is in Annex A, the recommended separation, because okay, they need to be separated. How far do they need to be separated? And the code does not dictate the amount of separation and distance, but it does recommend in Annex A that the separation be where 12 inches or 1 foot where cables are installed vertically, and 48 inches where they're installed horizontally, or 4 feet where they're installed horizontally, which is kind of interesting. Do you guys think that would be something that NICET may ask about on the NICET exam?
I figured they would, because they would want you to know that for real world application.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
based upon that, think of how important that would be in real world application to have a notification circuit fail completely. And let's say in a high rise, circuits that are transversing vertically up to a building, one fail, and then that notification is completely shut off from the rest of the building. So it's important to have that redundancy in circuit in a situation like that. And with NICET, NICET would want you to know something like that, and NICET would also want you to know how to find that information in Annex A, also,
Absolutely.
as you just mentioned.
Well, a question comes up, Brian. What buildings require Class A circuits?
Great question. Code doesn't dictate. There is no code requirement, at least in the national codes, that tells you what building types require Class A. It's not in the IBC, it's not in 72. It's all up to the local AHJ.
So, where would you see a requirement for a Class A circuit?
From my experience talking to our customer base, and Ed, I'm obviously going to go to you on this too to see what your real world's been outside of going to water flow switches, but hospitals, military, the military see a lot of Class A, a lot of Class X, which is Class A
But
on steroids.
what dictates that it requires a Class A circuit for a particular job?
Specifications in AHJ.
Can the AHJ require that?
Absolutely.
I'm not
And
so
also,
sure.
also based upon specification of the project, the designer of the system may require that based upon survivability of that circuit.
Yeah,
To
building
provide,
owner could require it.
sure.
And whether that be the local government, the state government, whatever, in governmental jobs, there are requirements for Class A's frequently.
Right.
Have you found that to be true, Brian?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
And
that's coming from the building owner,
right.
not the inspector, the fire department inspector of the
Right.
building.
And let me
Hmm.
let me clarify my AHJ statement that maybe a military AHJ or a government AHJ. I agree that your local AHJ is probably not going to require it, or it would be hard pressed, particularly if you asked him for justification of it. Okay, where were you seeing that in the code type of thing? But I'm thinking military, hospital.
Building owner type
Yes,
AHJ,
exactly.
as opposed to inspector.
Yes, exactly.
And Ed, from your experience, are Class A circuits less expensive than Class B systems?
Well, let's break down that question.
Let's break it down.
So we're talking about less expensive. We're talking about expense as far as materials or labor or the whole nut.
Everything.
Everything.
Okay. So think about this. What is a Class A circuit? It's a circuit that's extending out of the fire alarm or whatever piece of equipment we're actually using, and returning back in a separate pathway. So we're running a redundancy of equipment, materials. So expense. We have an expense at this point with this type of circuit. Now then we're talking about the labor end of things. Well, labor is not cheap, especially for fire alarm installations. So if we're running a particular circuit that we would classify as a Class A circuit, and we're returning it as a Class A circuit, it's going to take me more time to run these particular circuits. So, materials, yes, more expensive. Labor, yes, more expensive. So to answer your question, it's going to be a whole lot more expensive to run these types of circuits.
Absolutely.
But why do we have this particular circuit available to us? That's the question. Why do we use this circuit? How is the code written? The code is written based upon bad things that happen, correct? We all talk about that. So think about what has happened. Let's use 9/11, for example. 9/11 was a big eye-opener based upon, I think, fire alarm code in multi-story buildings. So with that being said, think about the notification circuits I mentioned before failing in the event of an emergency. And if it had a single pathway, think about that pathway completely destroyed. If it didn't have a return pathway, which a Class A circuit would give us, then people would have no idea what the emergency is. So to answer both questions, yeah, more expensive. And the types of buildings that I would see them in would be multi-story buildings, and done based upon specification by the designer.
Yep. Absolutely. Definitely not something your local fire department or other AHJ is going to require. Highly unlikely that they're going to require. Let's put it that way. Never say never.
I don't even think they would even ask what type of circuits are running. They want to see the performance of the system when they come to do their final inspection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, great. I appreciate you guys joining us today for the Temporal 3 podcast. That is the end of today's podcast. Thank you again, Charles, for your time. Ed, thank you for your time.
Thank
I
you,
look forward to
Bryan.
seeing you guys again next time.